All right, thank you very much for staying with us. We'll go straight to our discussion. Well, the lingering cash crunch is not getting funny again, as some Nigerians are finding it very, very difficult to access their funds. Up to yesterday or so, in some banks in Benin City, to be precise, you won't still have more than 20,000 naira, your own hard-earned money. What is the way forward? I will be looking at the economic implication of the continued cash crunch and, of course, the effects in our economy. And to join us to discuss this segment are two perfect gentlemen who are professionals in their field. I have with me in the studio Mr. Adolphus Arebame Aleto. He's the Managing Director, CEO of Rio Microfinance Bank Limited, Lagos, and he's a seasoned financial analyst and a business columnist with the Guardian newspaper. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Grace. My pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you very much. And right there in Lagos, Nigeria, is Mr. Austin Adigwe. Austin Adigwe is a business expert, and of course, he's also a consultant. Joining us live from Lagos, Nigeria. Austin Adigwe, glad to have you join us this morning. Austin Adigwe, are you there?
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Okay, quickly, let's just start, since Austin is the last person I introduced, let's just kick it up with Austin. Austin, looking at the cash crunch, do you think it's politically motivated according to some persons in the country?
Okay, so the monetization or Naira redesign, it's a matter of currency management. So whatever correlation that is being given is really not important. But for the fact that this policy has been badly managed, so we are facing serious macroeconomic problems in the country. I believe it's an economic policy anyway. When you demonetize or design your currency, it's a tool that monetary authorities uses to manage currencies. Okay, but in this case, it was not properly implemented. That's why we're having all these challenges.
Okay, let's come back to the studio. Aleto Arebame. To an extent, so people felt the reason why the whole Naira redesign was introduced was because of the election, and of course to attack some persons politically. Let's quickly take your thought.
Okay, so you can't fully conclude that it was politically motivated because you have to look at the reasons why it was first, the policy was first introduced. The CBN had introduced that policy sometime in October, and they told us that the money supply in circulation was about between 3.2 to 3.5 trillion, and that the money in the bank that could be planned with, that could be budgeted on, and manage the economy with, was had a shortfall of about 20%. So which means the total money, so out of the total money supply, you had about 80% outside CBN control. That's a whooping percentage, and it was going to distort. Of course, we've seen the distortion in the economic of the country. So in an attempt to address that 80% shortfall, the CBN had tried to put in place, the Naira redesign policy. And in addition, the CBN had also mentioned that they were going to curb counterfeiting and they were going to curb money laundering. So at that point in time, it was wise, for everybody to play along and believe that the CBN, would live up to their expectation by using this policy, to address those issues that they had mentioned. But unfortunately, we had seen how it played out. Even some of us as professionals, we had argued on behalf of CBN that it was not going to create any problem. But what has come to play and what everybody has generally agreed is that yes, it was a good policy, but in terms of implementation, there were still gaps and they needed to be improved on. I think that's the position that I would rather take.
Okay, I think we are kind of having a little network hitch here, connecting back to Austin Adigwe in Lagos. We just hope to restore that before we conclude this segment. But let's still continue with our guest here in the studio. Elections have come and gone. And it seems reintroducing the old Naira notes in circulation is giving way or is making it to look like the new Naira notes is no longer available. So how do you make sense out of this?
Well, please don't put me on the hot seat because, you know, I operate a regulated business. So,
Okay.
so you're asking me direct questions, you know, about my regulator. But I mean, that's on the play side.
Okay.
Yes, elections have come and gone. So this, you can also link this question to the first question that you asked.
Okay.
So when people say that the policy was politically motivated, okay, so now elections have come and elections are gone. We are still where we are. The cash is not there, all right? People still scamper for cash, even when we have declared winners, and then of course
You hardly find the new ones.
you hardly find the new. So now there are intricacies. There are, I mean, currency management, currency production. There are a lot of issues that surrounds it. Okay, I wouldn't know the step that CBN took.
Okay.
I know that we have a printing and minting company in Nigeria. The CBN had assured us that the currency was going to be printed in Nigeria. And of course, I think we got that confirmation that the first set of currencies were printed in Nigeria. But it has to do with capacity. I think that where the issues were when everybody expected that CBN was going to do a cash swap, CBN was indirectly doing a cash withdrawal. So the last experience with currency redesigned in 1985, what happened was you bring your 20,000 naira to the bank and then they give you the new 20,000 naira. So nobody had problem. But in this case, you bring your 100,000 naira to the bank and the CBN says you cannot take more than 20,000 naira within the specified period. So that's cash withdrawal, that's gradual cash withdrawal. And then what has also created that problem is that after a while, the CBN had told us that they had mopped up about 1.something trillion within a certain period. And having mopped up that, they said they had gone to destroy them. Now, if they have destroyed that currency,
About 1.something
trillion, it will be difficult with a policy reversal to now have that enormous quantity back into circulation. So what I think that the CBN is doing, is trying to quickly see how much of this they can print and then just managing the economy with the little that they have perhaps not destroyed. I think that is the issue that we have in this period. Don't also forget that there are some of us that are not very disciplined in terms of cash handling. I still attend occasions and I see people, you know, spraying this new currency that you are saying is not available. It's available for people to
How did
spray
they
at
get it?
occasion. Yes, how did they get it? So now we are dealing, the people that are doing business, households, consumers, are scampering for the old notes. But there are elites, there are socialites that are at every event, you know, distributing and spraying this currency. So it's a bit dicey when you want to lay this whole blame, you know, on the lap of the CBN. I think that disconnect or the distortion is with our ability as individuals, you know, of this great country to be able to stick to the usage of those currencies.
Now, I'd like us to quickly touch this area before I take the next shot.
Yes.
But despite the limited flow of this cash, we still see POS operators getting access to this money in large sum.
Yes.
And people who have deposited their money in the bank still struggle to get it.
Yes.
How do we balance it?
Okay, so now, you know, when you make a policy, you don't want to make a policy that will create a distortion with the existing policy. But most times in Nigeria, when you make a policy and it is outside the possible factors that can throw up issues that were not proactively put in place when those policies are being made, this is what you arrive at. So the Naira redesign policy was made. was introduced, and then a new set of industry was created. In the POS industry was created. Now, CBN had to quickly, with the rise of POS business and all the fees and charges, that they were making citizens face, with that rise, CBN had to quickly come into position to ensure that it does not go out of hand. What did they do? Recently, you will agree with me that they released a list of about 17 mobile money operators that will be regulated by the CBN to create sanity in that industry. So the CBN operators have become the new billionaires, in the financial sector in Nigeria. How do they have access to their cash? If I tell you that I know that phrase, I'll be lying to you. But in this country,
but they go to the banks.
Yes,
people see them go to the bank and they come out smiling.
In this country, a lot of things happen. But you see, the policy makers will make their policies, and then people will just go behind it and look at what we call the lacuna in those, look at the loopholes and then capitalize.
So in other words, what cannot happen in Nigeria does not exist. Is that what you're saying? Okay, we have Austin Adigwe back. So sorry, Austin Adigwe, we lost connection with you earlier on. Thank God you're back.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Austin Adigwe, let's quickly see, how does this policy affect our economy?
Okay, so it's expected that Nigeria has lost over 20 trillion to this cash crunch from the deceleration of economic activities. That's huge, and that is avoidable. Again, you find out that it is also slowing down economic activities, and what's hit are the SMEs, particularly those that are heavily cash dependent. Okay, so what you then find is that this critical sector of the economy that generates very high employment opportunities, okay, are shutting down. And with your SME struggling and shutting down, it creates even more macroeconomic problems. If this cash crunch is sustained for any reason, we're also going to see dip in investors' confidence in Nigeria, because what it does now is that it's affecting the ability of people to buy goods and services. And once the purchasing power is impaired, it affects production, investment, because it's a vicious cycle. So it is really not good for our economy. Now, CBN had mentioned that one of the reasons why there was need for Naira to be redesigned was the volume of cash outside the bank vaults. But I asked them, because I've always argued that the inflationary trend we have in Nigeria is not as a result of liquidity, excess liquidity in the system. It's basically a cost-push inflation. So you look at it in February, March, we've been going through this cash crunch. Okay, so banks are not able to even provide the minimum cash required to transact, okay, smoothly in the economy. And yet, inflation is still galloping. By end of March, we are staring at 22.04% inflation. So who is really deceiving who? So this is a very good policy, but it was not driven by data. It was not well implemented. And what CBN needs to quickly do now is to stabilize the supply of cash, and also make sure that the payment solution of banks work. Because you see, in the midst of all this crisis, whether the arguments would be for or against this policy is the collapse of our electronic payment system. Okay. If people don't have cash and the electronic payment system collapses, then their source of livelihood is at risk.
Okay. All right, Austin actually made mention of the electronic payment system. During that period, in the heat of the whole cash crunch saga, We saw how network providers were not able to meet up with expectation for weeks. Many people could never access their accounts, even through USSD code or even mobile app. Now, do you think to an extent, in any way, we can come on board and meet up with international standard?
Yes, we can. Praise. You see, good policy, but it was not properly thought through. Okay. And then all the fallouts that could have evolved, when the policy is implemented was not put in place. And what are those issues? The issue of technology, number one. The issue of manpower availability was number two. The issue of orientation, the orientation of the user, you and I, was number three. So the policy was implemented at a time when the telcos, the IT infrastructure of the commercial banks were not ready.
It was almost crashing.
Yes, it was not ready. So if the CBN had thought it through and gave the telcos and the commercial banks enough time, to beef up their IT infrastructure, I think we wouldn't have experienced what we experienced. Then the issue of manpower availability and capacity. A lot of our IT experts have exited the country in the past 1 year or so. So many of them are abroad, and getting them to work on these those available equipment was even an issue. Not to talk of when you now have that kind of upsurge. And then if you also look at the orientation, when I say the orientation of the user, of the consumer, my orientation and your orientation, it was something that took us by surprise. Yes, USSD is a payment mode, is the means of payment. POS and all that, there are various channels that are means of payment. But what I think that should have been done before the implementation, the National Orientation Agency and a publicity arm of the federal government should have done something maybe 90 days ahead, maybe even 180 days ahead, encouraging people, enlightening people, letting people know that after a while, we will have to leave that cash economy and begin to talk about
that means the campaign was not effective enough from the CBN side.
I think that the aspect of campaign caught CBN unawares.
Okay.
Even though after a while they tried to pick up, they did pick up midway, but I think that it was not it was something that was not planned for.
All right, Osna Degwe, you talked about inflation and rises in price of goods. But to an extent, during the whole, from between February and March, even January precisely, goods and commodity went down drastically. Like marketers, business owners were just trying to lay off their goods just to ensure it gets off their shelves. Do you think, in a way, the cash crunch was a blessing in disguise to some people?
No, I don't share that sentiment. I remember when inflation dipped by just marginal percentages between November and December. CBN celebrated it, and they also responded by increasing the MPR. And my take then was that, look, because of the problem that we're actually going through and the fear that this Denari design which kicked in as at December 15th, okay, breeds a lot of uncertainty. Most people actually got everything they needed for the Christmas celebration back in October, November. So purchases of goods and services were really down in December. Not necessarily due to the cash crunch, but because people have made early purchases. Okay. Now, for the sellers, as at December 2, they were stranded because you have goods. Some may not actually stay for too long without losing value. They had to sell at a loss. So you don't use those extraneous variables to compute and conclude that inflation has actually gone down. I said the classical example now is the shift from February to March. This is current. Now we're looking at the current situation. Year on year, inflation has risen by 6.31%. That's between March 2022 and March 2023. And month on month, inflation has also increased by 0.31%. So where is the liquidity? Now, let me also tell you what has happened. You see, this policy has eroded the confidence that Nigerians have in financial institutions. So you find banks now paying out and not even receiving deposits. These deposits are now going, this cash are going out of the banks, and the people have managed to create their own financial system. Supermarkets that before now would bring their previous days proceeds to banks now sells this cash to POS operators.
All right, Austin, so let's quickly manage our time. We have like 2 minutes just to wrap up to hand over to Abuja Network Center. Recently, the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, NECA, raised an alarm that Nigeria's debt profile may hit 77 trillion by June 2023. Yes. How did we get here?
You see, the issue of Nigeria debt is a different discussion, totally.
Absolutely.
Yes. I remember doing an article on them, and I titled it "White Nigeria Must Keep Borrowing." It was a sarcasm, because we kept borrowing, and then some people kept defending the borrowing, as telling the entire country that our debt to GDP, had a lot of headroom, and that we could borrow. They started mentioning countries with high debt rate to GDP. But you see, when you now borrow and you use over 90% of your revenue, to service the debt, that's where there becomes an issue.
Okay.
Where your revenue, you are not able to predict it, you don't have a stable revenue stream, and then you are borrowing and you have a fixed rate of repayment, that's where the problem comes.
Okay.
So for those, we have come a long way. Debt in Nigeria is a big problem. It's a topic for another day, I can tell you, Praise, because it's a big issue. 77 trillion, being touted for June this year is massive. Even though I am a proponent of borrowing, because the borrowing also has its own positives in the economy. But my position, when you get to 77 trillion, and then you are expected, even now that we are doing less than 50 trillion, and you are having to use over 90% of your revenue to service your debt, is a big issue for me.
All right, quickly, Austin Adigwe, as we begin to wrap up now, the incoming administration, which area should they focus on? We are preparing to have a new president assume duty by May 29th. Which aspects should they focus on the administration of Ahmed Bola Tinubu, the president-elect?
Okay, so the economy drives every other narrative. Okay, so I would expect them to put forward, policies that will begin to address all these distortions that we have in the system. They should first of all focus on the economy. If they get the economy up and running, every other thing will balance out.
Okay, thank you so much, Adolphus. We're so grateful to have you.
Two things they should do for us, really.
Okay, quickly.
Yes, two things they should do for us, really. They should just give us enough cash.
You should give us enough cash.
Yes, and then they should give us enough fuel.
Okay, two things, enough cash and enough. Thank you so much, Adolphus Arabame, for taking time to join us. We'll be having more time with you on the show. Also, Nadigwe all the way from Lagos, Nigeria. We're so grateful to have you join us this morning.